Good morning, everybody. Hope we're well. This morning, I want to kind of take a few moments to reflect or to add to something we talked about yesterday. So, it's interesting. I think every one of us has a different way we approach difficulty or concerns, loss. Part of it is because, as people, as humans, we all have this general sense of I don't know, of this general sense of sadness when we lose something. But I think as individual people, we each respond to difficulty a little differently, and sometimes it's hard to understand. Sometimes it's you watch the way somebody else might respond to something, and you wonder what it is that they're going through that would cause them to react to a circumstance in a particular way. I mentioned the fact that I had a friend call who was having a very difficult time due to some family health issues, and they wondered if there was something wrong with them because they were worried, right? So that's what we looked at yesterday. We looked at the idea of worry, and that when Jesus speaks about do not worry, he's not talking about having legitimate and genuine concern about a difficult circumstance. He's talking about a lifestyle, a way of life that focuses on the physical need and therefore the apparent need. There is some need there, but the idea that life is about is scrambling to get everything we think we need, and that our life is consumed by that. And he's saying, listen, that's not what life is. But so that's what Jesus is speaking to. He said, don't let your heart be overwhelmed by those things. Realize your Father knows what you need. Obviously, there's a work ethic to be had. There's responsibility to be taken. There is wisdom in regard to work and planning and saving, and all those things are encompassed in this idea of God's provision and how we steward God's provision. But primarily, it's recognizing we can trust our Father to give us everything we need. We can truly and utterly trust Him. So that's that general passage that Jesus is talking about in regard to our trajectory or our life and how we view the value, significance, and even the purpose of our life. It's not to eat or get clothing or have the best house, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the recognition that life is more than that. Don't be consumed by that. Your Father knows what you need. He will grant it to you, and He'll grant it to you in any one of a million ways. Right? And again, we can go back to talent, we go back to resources, we go back to experiences, we go back to work ethic, responsibility, but also miracles, right? God is not incapable of performing a miracle when necessary to give you something out of the blue you never imagined being able to get. Or He uses us to extend hands out, right? As we are able, as we're made aware, as we have the resources. It says that when we see someone in need and we have the resources to meet that need and we don't, we sin. We've missed the mark. So there certainly is a wedding of God seeing our need, our true and utter need, both in the physical realm, right? But also in the spiritual realm. And that as we focus on seeking Him and recognize His desire to provide, two things happen. One is we walk with Him in regard to what is at our disposal, in regard to work and responsibility, stewardship. That which He then gives us, and then whether that be through the miraculous giving, and even in that oftentimes being through the hands of others, through the hearts of others, the resources of others. And there are always times when each one of us either has the resources to give or don't have the need, and somebody else has the resources to give. And all that, again, has to do with how we apply wisdom to the truth of this life is not about our body, what we'll wear, our food, but in fact it's about seeking the kingdom of heaven and knowing that our Father will provide. But then the joy and the privilege of being the vessels through whom He provides, and the joy of receiving from His children, So there's a lot there, but the primary focus on that passage is a more general sense of how do I view life and the purpose of life and the value of life. So so what is a legitimate concern? What is legitimate sadness? Part of it is when life is threatened or there's a loss of life, that someone who is dear to us, something that is important to us, is somehow tragically lost. So we went to Philippians. God isn't saying you're sinning when you're anxious. What he's saying is you render yourself ineffective, and our relationship can't function as God intends if we remain in our anxiety. We keep focused on the problem, and we don't take it to God and allow his peace, which transcends the circumstance and the condition of our heart, to cause us to rise above this thing. The other side of that is he's not angry when we're sad or when we're mourning. I think there are times when the threat of life is such that God is alerting us to whatever the peril might be or the potential loss and the grieving. Part of that is we reflect him. It says in the Old Testament, it's a profound little statement. He says, I do not rejoice in the death of the wicked. Think about that for a moment. God's desires that all men would come to him. They would all repent. They would all find themselves in the circumstance they find themselves, and that God, in the midst of that circumstance, is trying to get our attention, to turn us to him. And so, in essence, he grieves at the loss of any human life, especially eternal loss. I do not rejoice in the death of the wicked. Well, the feelings we oftentimes have, right, are the expression of the very feelings that God has. The issue is he deals with them wisely and perfectly. We can be overwhelmed by them. So also in the Old Testament, it says that the heart is deceitful above all things. So oftentimes our heart, when he speaks of the heart, that's the origin of our feelings in essence. It's a euphemism. My heart and my feelings can deceive me. In other words, I can determine truth by what I feel. And so if for whatever reason I'm sad, I've suffered loss and I'm grieving, and my feelings rise up and it overwhelms me, and I allow it to make me think that God doesn't care about me or doesn't care about this circumstance or isn't in this circumstance, my heart is deceiving me. My feelings are deceiving me. And so what I have to do is I have to go to the truth. That's the whole point. We run to God and we ask him. We say to him, Father, this is what I need you to do. I need you to show me the truth of this. These feelings are legitimate and they're real. I have suffered loss and I'm hurting. And Father, I'm kind of blaming you for it right now. Open my eyes to see. That's what James means in James 1 when he says, listen, when you persevere through suffering, rejoice. And if you're lacking wisdom as to how to perceive your suffering, ask for it. And God will not hold it against you. He does not find fault, but he gives it to you generously because he realizes, what we're doing is we're allowing that circumstance and our inability to understand it to force us to him and to ask for wisdom to discern, God, what are you doing here? Or what will you do here? How will you take this thing that the enemy might have even meant to wreck me? My flesh wants to run away from you, but your spirit is rising up in me to cause me to stop, realize that my feelings might be deceiving me right now and telling me an untruth about you or my relationship with you or your care for me. Father, give me the wisdom to see what's happening in the moment, what it is, where it is you have me, what the effect is, and where it is you're taking me. And here's the last thing. We are allowed to grieve, even when we know that the outcome in God's hands will be for our good. Jesus grieved. He grieved over the city of Jerusalem. He grieved over lost people. It says in Hebrews that he regularly cried to the Father and with tears, praying. And I want to look at a passage where even though Jesus knew what the outcome was going to be, he still grieved. He was sad. He wept. So turn to John 11 with me real quick. It says, now a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, very close friend of Jesus. The village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil, wiped his feet with her hair. It was her brother, Lazarus, who was sick. So the sisters sent a message to him. Lord, the one you love is sick. Now think about that for a moment. Lazarus is described as the one Jesus loved. We know that Jesus loved everyone. We know that the demonstration of his life was a constant expression of that love. So imagine having a relationship with Jesus in such a way that he would be described as one Jesus loved. So there was a special relationship. There was a closeness between Jesus and Lazarus. There was something about this relationship that could be described by others as being the one you love is sick. So we go on. Verse 4, when Jesus heard it, he said, this sickness will not end in death, but it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified. Now, what is Jesus saying here? Listen, I know what the outcome is going to be. I know what it's going to be. This is not going to end in death. So Jesus foreknows the occurrence. He foreknows. Mostly what he's doing is this. He's putting his trust in his Father and his Father's intentions, and living for that glory, to edify, to lift up, to glorify the Father, and knows that every act will end in such a thing. We got to stop here for a minute, because this is the truth for every one of our circumstances, for everything a child of God experiences. We know what the end is going to be. He's going to work it out for our good because we love him. It's truth. It's what he says. My heart might deceive me. My heart is deceptive above all things, says Jeremiah, right? So my heart might deceive my mind and tell me an untruth. This doesn't matter to God. You don't matter to God. This circumstance is too small for God. He doesn't care how you feel. All of those are untruths. All of them. God isn't here. God doesn't have power over this. Not true. The idea of God working all things out for the good. How can that be? Would he use a sinful act or the consequence of sin to accomplish his work? Yeah, he said all things. Not just good things. Not just well-intended things. Not just things that feel good. He said all things. And so we can know the end. As much as this is a miracle of Jesus, and in regard to him being both man and God, and certainly we're going to see his humanity here in a moment, but he has such a close and intimate relationship with the Father that he knows what the outcome is going to be, right? And we go, well, that's Jesus. Well, hold it, stop. These promises are for us too. He's written these things down that we might know and have confidence that our deceiving heart that has feelings that are legitimate, right, but need to be brought into line with God's truth, can deceive our own minds. That's why in 2 Corinthians 10, Paul says, listen, whoa, the war we wage isn't like what the world wages. This is a spiritual war, and the battlefield is the mind. Because there are things that are going to stand up against the knowledge of God in your mind, and you have to take the weapons, the spiritual weapons you possess, and you have to slay those things. You have to capture them and bring them to Jesus and make them obedient. What's he saying? He's saying, listen, your mind can be deceived by your own heart. As your heart is deceitful, your mind can be deceived. You need the truth, and here's the truth. He works all things out for the good. All things. God is not disappointed with us. I don't see that word anywhere in the New Testament. Nowhere. He knows us. He knows our frailty. He knows we're made of dust. He treats us with compassion. He wants us to lean into him. The purpose of our remaining dusty is that when things occur, we don't try to live it out on our own. We defeat our flesh by engaging with the Holy Spirit and joining with God in the moment, running to him and revealing to him our trust, our love, and the recognition that we can't do this on our own. That's working out our salvation with fear and trembling, seeing I can't do this. And I mess it up when I try to do this. Father, I'm so glad you've started this. You're keeping me, and you have promised to finish this. And guess what? Guess what? That is to your glory. And I benefit from your glory. So we go back, right? And so we need to recognize here, Jesus knows the outcome. We can know the outcome. Even though we might not know the specifics, we know the general trajectory of God's intentions. He works all things for the good. We can rejoice in our suffering because it produces in us perseverance, character, godliness, hope, faith, maturity, completion, wisdom, the likeness of Jesus. So we can rejoice. As difficult as a circumstance, as unhappy and sad a circumstance might be, we can have an underlying, undergirding joy, knowing full well what Jesus knew here. This is not going to end in death. Our lives don't end in death. Physical death? Absolutely. But not eternal death. And in fact, he brings life through all of it. And that's his point for this story. And that's why he's not upset with us when we're sad, when we grieve, when we doubt. No, he uses us to draw us back to his heart, to see our own frailty and our own inadequacy, and that we would lean into him and we would partner here. We would just seek God's heart, his face, his wisdom, his power, lean into him and be vessels of his purposes. So, I'll go back to John 11. When Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness will not end in death, but it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." This is true for us. Peter says when we rejoice in our suffering, when we persevere through it, when we remain in the fire, that refining fire, it says it proves our faith genuine when Jesus is revealed, and it brings him glory and honor. We can know the exact same thing Jesus is saying here. This is not just about Jesus in this circumstance. This is not just about Lazarus and the one he loved, because we are the ones he loved. Every one of us can take a child, as children of God, who have been enraptured and captured by Jesus and made new and a child of the Father. We can all say this. This man Lazarus was in Bethany. He was the brother of Mary and Martha. He was loved, right? When your brother or sister recognizes your hurt, your pain, your sickness, this is what can be said about us. Lord, the one you love is sick. The one you love. Put your name in the middle of that sentence. Put it there. That's the truth. And so when Jesus says this sickness will not end in death, but it is for the glory of God, and that the Son of God would be glorified in it, that's the truth. And our heart's feelings may deceive us and tell us otherwise. Our mind may start to struggle with understanding. But when we recognize the truth of this, we allow the Spirit to rise up and remind us who we are and whose we are, that we are dearly loved. We are the one he loves. That God is glorifying himself in us and through us. That Jesus will be revealed through the process and we will become more like him. This act right here, these passages right here are for us. So he goes on to say now, when Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness will not end in death, but the glory of God and the Son of God, it may be glorified by it." Now, Jesus loved Martha, her sister. This is Mary's sister. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in that place. He hesitated. He waited. God doesn't always jump when we want him to jump. He doesn't always touch when we think he should be touching. Sometimes he waits. Sometimes he waits for the cup to be full, for that last drop to say, okay, it's ready. Look what it says next. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place. And why might that be? So his glory would be most magnified, so that each heart would be ripe for the picking, that everyone in this experience would be at just the right place, time, and condition to fully receive what God has for them, to be truly, truly impacted and transformed. So Rabbi, the disciple, told him, just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going to go back there again? So he's actually risking his life by going back. I'm going to switch to a different translation here real quick. And then we got to scoot. I'm running out of time. So Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. In other words, this is God's design. This is his will. What is happening is according to my Father. As long as I walk in the context of that purpose and that will, it's daylight. It's going to be okay. It is when a person walks at night by their own sight, which is actually blindness, that they begin to stumble. When they go on their own accord, their own strength, their own navigational skills. Right? A man makes his plan, but the Lord determines his steps. That's daylight. Lord, your word is a light shining on my path. That's daylight. Lord, you guide me according to your purposes. That's daylight. The trouble is when I think I got it and I'm going to go when I think I need to go without consulting my Father. Ooh, I got to stop. Jesus said, so he goes on to say in verse 11, after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So Jesus, knowing again the end, recognizes, even as this life passes, we are in essence sleeping, waiting for the kingdom. We are taken to a place to be comforted while we wait for the true and real heavens to be revealed and for us to be welcomed into that new Jerusalem on that new earth. In the meantime, in essence, we, quote, sleep. So he goes on to say, which is another subject for another day. Then Thomas said to the rest of them, so Jesus said, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. In other words, I had to allow this to run its course for you all to be ready for what you're going to see, and for your hearts and minds to receive it and be transformed. We're going to have to stop here and we'll finish this Monday. But I want us to take this into account. Every circumstance we find ourselves in, God is allowing it to run its course. He will not intervene. Peter says it is not, God is not slow as we understand slowness. No, his slowness, apparent slowness, is his patience, and it means salvation, because he's waiting for each person's heart. Listen, not only does he know all mankind and loves them, he knows every person and wants for them. He also knows each one of us personally. He knows right where we are. He knows just what we need, and he will not circumvent the circumstance. He will not stop a moment that is actually going to be used for the transforming of our heart, the increasing of our hope, the increasing of our stamina, and us being conformed more and more into the likeness of Jesus. He's going to let it run its course so that it's optimum when he finally flips a switch. And this is not unmerciful. This is not cruel. This is actual kindness. When we ground our kids for 2 weeks, the worst thing we can do, and we have good reason to do so, and we've explained to them what the purpose is, and we've done this for the sake of their discipline, we've done it for the sake of their character and for the sake of their growing through it. The worst thing we can do is somehow have pity, allow our heart's feelings to deceive our minds that it would be okay for us to cut that short. And what we've done is actually short-circuited the discipline and the outcome of the discipline. So it is with everything. God is wise. He's not cruel. He recognizes that everything must run its course and finish its work to be ripe for that picking. He is not slow as we understand slow. He is not upset with us when we grieve. He's not disappointed with us when we have legitimate concern. No. In fact, he allows it to run its course, and then he joins us in the midst of it, knowing its outcome. But he goes on to say, and I'll give us a little clue for Monday, he wept. Even though he knew the outcome, he grieved. He hurt. He empathized. He hates the result of death. He made us to live forever, and sin has wrecked the whole thing, and he was coming to redeem us. But he knows the best way to do that is to allow it to run its course, to be patient in the waiting, to console in the meantime, to give wisdom to understand. but then to use it for our good. He's not upset with you when you grieve, when you suffer loss. It's his desire to use these times to draw us to himself, to purify us, that he would be revealed in us and to us. And he knows what's best. Because even though my heart might say otherwise, because it's deceiving, he is good. And I need to allow the truth to straighten my mind, to better understand it, that it might trickle back into my heart, rein my feelings in, and allow them to do what they're meant to do, to drive me to the Father, not away from him.